bulletins. That world didn't just inform us, it sustained us. It said, you are here, you matter, your lives are worth documenting. So today we're going to spend time with two women who were part of that world. Our guests today are Toni Armstrong Jr. and Carol Seajay. Toni Armstrong Jr. is a longtime anti-racism and pro-female activist. She's been a force in lesbian feminist culture for over 5 decades. You probably know her best as co-founder, publisher, writer, and managing editor of Hotwire, the Journal of Women's Music and Culture, which she ran from 1984 to 94. During those 10 years, Hotwire published 30 issues, all by and for women. They covered lesbian feminist, woman-identified entertainment and publishing culture, and Toni trained more than 150 women as staff members. She also published the magazine Paid My Dues and produced concerts, Mountain Moving Coffee House in Chicago, and her own Empty Closet Productions in Florida, where she is now. She's also known for performing, including Surrender Dorothy and Lavender Jane bands, and for her tireless devotion to promoting, documenting lesbian feminist women's culture. And she was instrumental in raising funds and awareness about the land in Michigan, and is co-producer. They recently bought the land in Michigan. She's co-producer of the intergenerational lesbian festival Rise, held in July. And she was youth leadership development lead with GLSEN Chicago and has spearheaded programs on cultural sensitivity and literacy and anti-racism workshops for the group BLAST, Women of the Palm Beaches, and hosts WACT, Women of All Colors, Cultures Together brunches, and was co-producer of the multi-generational, multicultural National Black Women Rise conferences. Our second guest, Carol Seajay, helped document the feminist movement through journalism and helped hold the entire feminist publishing ecosystem together. I know I'm quoting somebody, but I don't remember who. She founded the Feminist Bookstore News in 1976, following the first National Women in Print Conference, which was a remarkable gathering of bookstore workers, printers, and publishers in Nebraska, convened because women knew they needed to keep the energy and connection alive. I'm told that the 5 largest feminist bookstores each donated $100 each to help get women in print off the ground, and Carol published the first issue of Feminist Bookstore News in October of that year. What began as a modest mimeographed newsletter grew into something essential. By 1988, that was 76 that they started. By 88, the publication had expanded to 48 pages, professionally printed, and issued roughly every 2 months. It became, as one writer put it, the glue that kept women booksellers around the world together. It was a trade publication, a gossip sheet, a political forum, and a lifeline for feminist publishers, printers, and booksellers across the United States and internationally. Carol edited, printed, and distributed it as a one-woman operation for 24 years until the final issue in 2000. Along the way, Carol also co-founded Old Wives' Tale, a feminist bookstore in San Francisco, which was a community institution serving lesbians and women for nearly 2 decades. She understood deeply that books don't find their readers by accident. Someone has to build the shelves, stock them with care, and open the door. These 2 women represent something extraordinary, the lesbians who built our infrastructure of ideas. They didn't wait for permission. They created the press. They ran the bookstores. They kept us connected to each other and to ourselves. And we are so honored to have them with us today. And we're going to ask you each to begin by saying a little bit about your publication. We'll start with Toni.
Go, okay.
Start with Toni.
I'll go first because my publication started first. So.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it started at the first Women in Print conference, where there were like 19 feminist booksellers there, and we just talked to each other, talk, night and day. And as the week went by, it was like, well, we don't want to stop talking to each other. And someone came up with a lot. We came up with a lot of ideas, none of which were going to work. And someone said a newsletter. And I had done the newsletter for Kalamazoo Women's Liberation. And maybe even more important, I did the newsletter for the Michigan abortion counseling clergy and feminist counselors. And I knew how having just the information you needed changed women's worlds. That, you know, a woman from a village in Michigan, if she had the right clergyman, could get the information on how to go to Japan and get a legal abortion. It was just like information matters in our lives. So I said, okay, a newsletter. How much time can that take? I was also starting a bookstore at the exact same time. And 6 weeks after the conference closed, Andre Rivers also volunteered to sign up to work on that. And we had the first issue in the mail on October 14th, 6 weeks after the conference. So what FVN is, I felt like it was a support system for feminist booksellers. It said, we're here, we exist. It was to get information about publications and about things that worked in other bookstores, especially to the smaller bookstores, because in San Francisco and Boston and New York, we found out about books. In Fargo, North Dakota, not so easy to find out about the books. In a lot of smaller places, it was very hard to get that information. So a lot, as you said, the women in the larger stores really worked hard to put that information out. And, I would just go to the bookstore and type it up. But ultimately, what we were was kind of a look at the world through feminist bookseller colored glasses. Eventually, the printer's newsletter closed and the publishers had a newsletter, and that didn't last very long. So eventually they all came in under the FBN umbrella. But my commitment was it was about booksellers. And everybody else got to read it. And it was, kind of a good gossip, I kind of thought. And I think one of the important things we did was reflected back to the booksellers that they existed. If you're a one-woman show in Huntsville, Alabama, you don't have a supportive community. They all want to come in and use the bookstore, but they don't know what you're going through to make it happen. And every couple of months, a fan would come in usually a plain brown wrapper, and open it up. And all of a sudden, that bookseller had co-workers and colleagues and sisters and women who understood. And we said, just at arriving in the mail, said, what you're doing is important. What you are doing is so important. And it's changing the world. We're getting that. We're all information centers, and we're getting all of this feminist and lesbian and anti-racist, all of this information into women's hands, and you're doing it. So I think that's what we were. Take it, Toni.
Well, Hotwire was from 1984 to 1994. I see Georgette Harper and Kathy Munzer are both here. Both of them involved with the magazine for the entire 10 years, I believe. Georgette, especially as a writer, covered festivals. She was a photographer, proofreader. Kathy, I know that you came and stuffed envelopes and did all sorts of stuff as well. It was a completely, as pretty much all of our enterprises were, volunteers, long-suffering volunteers. Our 30 issues that we ultimately had over 100 volunteers, at various points. Like you, Carol, our focus was very, very specific. It was by, for, and about women and women's music and culture. So obviously music, theater, literature, all of those sorts of things. And we were the only one that's ever existed that's done that before or since. I was telling them before the Zoom opened up that in the last couple of years, I've been working on indexing all of it so that I can get a very deep index online. The software that exists allows you to search for names and things like that. That's doable now. But for example, if you're looking for Black lesbian musicians in the labor movement, software doesn't exist to find thematic stuff when you're looking in an index. So to this end, I've reread every single issue, cover to cover, every caption, every ad, everything. And the index is just completely amazing. And sometimes now in my elder years, we're so far away from those times, I look back and I think, am I just having euphoric recall? Oh, it was so great in my day, And rereading these Hotwire magazines, it's like, oh my God, it was that good and better than I even was remembering. Yes, there were dozens and dozens and dozens of bookstores and radio shows and producers. The skeleton was just nice and there, and the audiences were there. And so Hotwire documented all of that. And we're online at hotwirejournal.com. All of the issues are there, and they're in PDF form and downloadable. The index is not there yet, and I'm working with Mev on digitizing those sound sheets that were in the back. That was one of the things that somebody suggested early, and we took to it. They were like, wouldn't it be great if we could actually hear the music too? And it's like, sure, why not? We'll get a barn, we'll put on a show. How hard can it be? But what we did work out was with the artists, they actually paid for their part of being on the sound sheet. And in exchange, they got an article and an ad either in that issue or in a different issue, however they wanted to work it. So they could write it off as a promotional thing, and it didn't cost us any more money. Because, of course, this was not a profitable venture, to say the least. But it's culturally profitable. So I'll leave it there.
And so how did you exist? And how did you survive? And what were the interpersonal dynamics of working collectively like that? Each of you, please.
Oh, with all the X's involved at any given moment? It's delightful. Carol, how did you stay organized?
Well, financially, I survived because my day job was old wives' tales. So I was working in the bookstore, and, in the early days, if we paid each other $200 a month, that was adequate. So that was the first part. And now I have to remember, what was the rest of your question? How did we exist?
Interested in the dynamics, working as a feminist organization collectively with other feminist women, lesbian women, back in the day. How was that? What was that like for each of you?
Well, there are whole stories about feminism, about old wives' tales as a collective, but I will not fill up all the time with that. The Feminist Bookstore News started, it was basically Andre and I, and we would she lived in Santa Rosa, I was in San Francisco. We would say, okay, you write up everything about this and I'll write up everything about that. And we would type onto our stencils from our respective typewriters. And then, the thing is, we had to print. And, like photocopying was not a financially viable thing in that day. But the bookstore in Santa Rosa or someone had acquired this printer. So I would borrow a car. We'd type on our stencils. I'd borrow a car, drive up to Santa Rosa, and someone would have gotten the printer up, and we would print one side of all the papers. And then, ink has to dry. So I'd have to stay overnight, and then we would print the other side, and we'd address and stamp and put it all in the mail. So it was mostly Andrea and I working together. And then for a long time after she left, it was me putting it together. So I either got along with myself or I didn't. Some days, but some days then. And eventually I did get a little grant and was able to hire someone like for 3 afternoons a week or whatever it was. And then when I started doing it full time, it was after a major kerfuffle at Old Wives' Tales. And I came out of that swearing. I was never going to put my heart into something that was owned collectively again. So after that, it was mine. I hired people. I never had to fire anybody. We pretty much just worked things out. But it was unfortunately the situation where I was ultimately the one who said, this has got to be done. But, and there were, by the end, we had 5 full-time staff people doing Feminist Bookstore news and the catalogs. So it was pretty exciting. It was pretty heady. And all of the mainstream publishers paid for ads in it. And that was we had subscribers that paid the printing bill. And then the mainstream publishers basically paid everybody's salaries. Toni?
Well, Hotwire was a very different sort of a thing. Every issue was 64 pages, some were 68, and the final one was 76. We had a whole bunch of volunteer writers and those who did all the office work. We only got 1 grant ever in 10 years, and that was something that was just given to us. We didn't even apply for it. We really learned the hard way that lesbian feminist stuff is not fundable, even through things like Estrella. They are not interested, and so even when we absolutely met the criteria that had been laid out point for point, we still just weren't fundable. We got some money from ads, but we also were really committed to our core topic of women's music. Nobody has any money and to begin with. So they can't, we don't want to price them out of getting ads in the one magazine that's about them, right? So we kept everything really low and did as much volunteer stuff as possible. Georgette will appreciate the memory of us sitting in a freezing basement using a borrowed typesetting machine. I mean, originally we had to type it on a typewriter, but then, we had typesetting machine. We also had a couple of volunteers who worked at the Pioneer Press, which was the local suburban newspaper. And we would send them off with photos and they would get halftones made when their bosses weren't looking. We found a woman printer and were able to use her through almost the whole 10 years, which was fantastic. We also had what we called the Fairy Godmother program, which was basically, we just said, give us money. You're not going to get anything for it. Not a subscription, not a mug, nothing. You just give us money and we'll put your name in the magazine. And bless them, because they made all the difference. There were months that I paid more for Hotwire than I did for my mortgage. I worked as a full-time special ed teacher at a high school. So a lot of it was, when the bills were coming due and we just hadn't made it. It came from me, but that's okay. It was a good investment, and I don't regret it, not for a second. It was all worth it. And I have to say too, I think Hotwire was a uniquely Chicago kind of a thing. We had a community that was huge, absolutely huge. And even though Chicago's a fairly segregated city, there was a lot of coalition stuff. It was segregated, but not hostile, if you know what I mean. So based on where you lived in the city, you plugged into all sorts of lesbian things. There was, 2 lesbian bookstores at one point. The Artemis Singers, Mountain Moving Coffee House was doing 40 shows a year, 40 Saturday nights a year. You could go to Mountain Moving Coffee House and have a lesbian show. I mean, people were in Hotwire and Artemis and Mountain Moving and working with Pat McCombs and working with CC Carter. And, I think we wouldn't have had the base of volunteers to even pull from if we were in a different place and a different time. So the dynamics, it was comical at times trying to deal with volunteers who they had no friends at all. So that's why they were volunteering. And there was a reason they had no friends. And our volunteer coordinator was, of course, charged with being friendly with all of them. And she deserves some kind of an award. Lindsay Galchi, who lives in Seattle now. And when she moved, when she was finally moving away a year before Hotwire closed, she was like, I'm not going to miss these people, these crazy women, that are so hard to deal with. And we have to be so nice to them because they're helping, we have to all be accepting and sisterly. So when she came back to visit a couple of years later to prank her, I picked like the worst of them and invited them over and said, "Oh, Lynn wants to see you." And it was so funny. The doorbell would ring and in would come one and she would have to not look at me. So there's a lot of entertaining things that happen. And of course, with a community as thriving, I'm sure everybody could say the same thing who's here in the Zoom. You had lots of girlfriends and breakups, and then somehow you have to be in the community together. You have to work together. And I think Chicago did better than some other places in that regard as well. Some drama is unavoidable, but the lesbian wars that you hear about, really that wasn't us except in the very early 70s. So.
That's great. I love hearing about from each of you your personal adventures in creating these portions of our history. And I'd also like to know, where would you like all of your work to go, to flow? What would you see as a good future?
Well, I'm looking a lot at archival stuff now. Terry Grant is here, maybe can talk a little bit. Margie maybe can talk about what's happening up at Michigan State. But, I'm very interested in making sure that researchers and documentarians of the future can find us. And this has been very important to me for about 30 years. So we had a project. There were several of us, Catherine Roma, June Millington, Margie Adam. I forget who all else was involved. Bowden Sandstrom. About 20 years ago, we started to really look into which archives would be best to get our stuff so that we could encourage all of our colleagues to get their stuff at least in a few central places. Because a filmmaker doesn't have any money either, so they're not going to run around to 50 different archives to find stuff. We need to be in the same places. And Mev, you've got quite the list that's current. You might talk about that a little before we end. It's a whole different world at this point than what we knew. Feminism is different. Lesbianism is different. The communities, for the most part, don't want lesbians in them. We're not part of the alphabet stew, as we know. And so the young women are cut off from having the sorts of experiences that we were able to create with each other. So where do we go with that? Well, we make sure that we're findable. And we also go where the young women are, which is a tall challenge, and why I'm very invested in the Rise Festival on the land. Young women are there. The structure of that festival is interesting. It's anyone who is born female. So there are a few trans men there, and several detransitioners, and women, and androgynous women, and females. So that's a really interesting way that the producer has set it up. And it's fun to go where the young women are. It's fun to be with them, and they are very curious about what we did in the olden days. And I'm very curious about how they're navigating their life on the higher plane that we all gave to them. We cut the path. They have so fewer obstacles of the type that we had. And so I'm curious, what are the obstacles now? You know, it's an interesting world where most of our straight friends support us and the LGBTQ soup doesn't. I never anticipated that when I was younger. So I'm looking for both forward and back, I guess.
Yeah, it's very interesting being relics, which very many of us are now. Carol, what about you?
Yeah, it is interesting being relics, and it's a good way to look at it. One of the things I've been very lucky that Julie Inzer, who's the mad woman behind Sinister Wisdom with all these projects and publishing and putting a lot of, our really important writers back into print, from Minnie Bruce to Pat Parker, and one could go on all hour about that. She came up with this idea of getting all of Feminist Bookstore news onto archives. We had been put up by a kind of university-based thing, but they skipped like the first 6 years, and they were based. A lot of librarians, university librarians, subscribe to FBN, but they tended to take the copies home and not leave them in their university archives. So the collections they had were a little spotty. So Julie organized somebody to scan all the rest of the issues. So those are all up. She started this project again of doing an articles index, and now there's this really big project going on of creating an index of all of the books that were ever mentioned in Feminist Bookstore news, of which, sometimes I scare her and say, well, there were probably at least 60,000 book mentions. And her hair just goes gray. But she has organized these incredible crews to do all of this work. And, women are coming in and they pick an issue of Feminist Bookstore news and go through and just feed every title into this incredible database. And then we will have this wonderful database, which would be searchable. A lot of when we put together the issues, we would put the books in categories from our own presses, being the lesbian and feminist presses, would be the one that was front and center, because that's the best stuff. And then there would be from the other small presses, and then there would be another category, which is from the university presses, and then one from the mainstream presses. So at some point, one will be able to just call up everything that was from our own presses, and that will generate a list of all the feminist publishers, what books they published, something about all of those books. So, we're trying to, it's an incredibly big project. And if anybody has some spare time, it's one you could sign up for. Just email Julie at sinisterwisdom.org. She'll put you right to work. And Rose was involved in the one about putting together the articles database. So that's a piece that we're doing about keeping it available, keeping the legacy alive, and seeing, nobody has really put together a study of what the hell did lesbians publish in those decades, and that will give us a chance to get credit for all the work we did. One of the other, I mean, that gang is so incredible. They also, created statistics, like, for instance, I didn't know, but altogether we did 134 issues. How many pages did that add up to? 10,746 pages. Every time I read that, I feel like, oh, I have to go lie down for a while and rest. What other juicy statistics are there in there? That we did. I guess one of the other things I would just throw into that is, yeah, and that the issues, the longest issue was 162 pages, but the average issue was 100 to 140 pages, because of course there were more pages at the end. And that we transitioned the journey from type it onto a stencil, put the stencil on a drum, print it yourself, to mass photocopying, which was God's gift, the goddess's gift to publishers, and then mass and affordable. And the last year, we did 2 electronic issues that were fully electronic and 1 print issue. But, there was just ran out of steam at that point.
Yeah, we were wallowing in treasure of lesbian publishing back then. It was just so rich, and there was so much, and there was just everything was happening, and everything was so simple, and we didn't have a lot of technology, but boy, it all sure did come out there. But y'all, Toni, want to have anything more to say about that? Carol, anything more to say to each other, of each other?
One of the things that we did, we had a column called Hotline, which was 4 to 5 pages of the magazine every time. And it was nothing but announcements. Who was opening, who was closing, who was offering a grant, who was looking for a submission, what festival was going to happen, these kind of things. And we had exchange publications. So every feminist and lesbian publication that was willing, which was almost all of them, we just exchanged the subscriptions with. And we had some volunteers who their whole job was to read these things and pull out these paragraph long little announcements. And FBN was a big source for us. As I'm looking in the index, I'm seeing how much came from you, really. Another thing I wanted to say that about my own indexing project with Hotwire was a decision I made that's entertaining to me, is everybody that's a character, not necessarily the author, but the character. For example, all of the Dykes to Watch Out For characters are in the index. And so any Catherine V. Forrest's, ongoing characters and so forth are all findable as well.
Yeah, that's how a way of celebrating the culture that we made it and created it and not letting it slip away. I think one of the best things we did was to include the information about how you could order anything that we found out about. And that was so important, because someone could publish a pamphlet or a book and not have to know everything about publicity. they could just send it to us with the ordering information, and we would tell the Dyke world, and people would order, booksellers would order the books, and then they could do promotion on top of it. Great. But it was easy. We made it easy to get that out, and people Hotwire would snatch things up and move them on to the next layer and circle. And the interesting thing, I mean, it was so effective that, like, the women who were the editors at Harper and Row, they had a special section about spirituality, and they did a lot of feminist spirituality stuff. And they were the ones who really pushed us to take advertising, because they were right. That all they had to do was put a one-page ad in Feminist Bookstore News, and they would sell out their first print run. And this is Harper and Row. This is not some little publisher. And at the same time, Publishers Weekly, and, well, I mean, at Harper and Row, we had 8 subscriptions. We had 8 editors who felt compelled to know what the lesbians and the feminists were doing, because either they were lesbians and feminists, or because that supported the work they were doing. And they needed to know what we were publishing to know what was going to be good selling books for them in the future. But Publishers Weekly also read us, and they used us in a way that I could and would say whatever I thought in FBN, but their editors wouldn't let them say some of the kinds of things that I said, like when there were the lawsuits about big publishers giving special discounts to chain bookstores to the disadvantage of independent and feminist bookstores. And we won one of them. And so that publisher had to give, I forget what it was, like some $1,000 to each bookstore. And so I said, well, what if we considered that every publisher was doing that, and that these size benefits are being given to every book, to every chain store? So, I think that the decision that came down from the courts was, I'm not going to be able to remember. It was like $6 million had gone to the chains that the independents weren't getting in benefits. So I said, what if every publisher, let's assume every publisher is doing that, and the chain stores are getting not 6 million, but overall the publishers $60 million or $90 million a year collectively. And Publishers Weekly couldn't say anything like that, but they could quote Feminist Bookstore News saying that. And so there were a lot of, very progressive, helpful people in the publishing industry who could quote FBN, and they didn't lose their jobs. They were just reporting what was out there. So, we did that kind of troublemaking and agitating in the mainstream book world, which I found quite satisfying.
Carol, I don't know if you want to talk about this or get off on this, or maybe Toni does, about what happened in publishing in the 90s. What happened to publishing, and that caused so many bookstores to go out of business, just mainstream publishing, and how that affected FBN, and I imagine it affected Hotwire too.
One of the horrible things that happened was the progression of capitalism, where the biggest fish eat the next fish down. And so that means the biggest publishers bought out the really good independent publishing houses that had, Shankman's, which specialized in Jewish literature. All these publishers got eaten up and kind of swallowed by the mainstream publishers. And so that really changed the dynamics in the book world. Very fewer books were published, fewer specialty books were published. And at the same time, they're trying to create a mass culture, and they're feeding all these benefits into chain stores. And the chain stores are consolidating. Borders went from being a fine independent bookstore to a chain of, I don't know how many hundred stores they had. All of whom got benefits. They got discounts that the independent and feminist stores couldn't get. So basically, the big publishers subsidized the big chain stores and stepped on everybody else. And so we lost really incredible, even mainstream publishers. We lost bookstores because, the devil will do you in, but the sales unfortunately shifted over somewhat to the chain stores, and the feminist bookstores survived that longest. But then Amazon.com came along, and a lot of feminists actually thought that was Amazon Bookstore up in Minneapolis had figured out how to do online ordering. Great, let's go order. Isn't that great? But that's not who it was. It was somebody masquerading as us. So that really affected, ultimately that was why FDN closed, because the advertising disappeared, where we had 23 publishers who would do full page ads multiple times a year. They would take all this press they'd consolidated and give them each a book in an ad instead of a whole ad. So it was a sad time. It was a hard time.
Well, speaking of time, how are we doing now with time?
Yeah, I was just getting ready to say we've got about well, if Carolyn and Toni are finished for now, or Rose, if you don't have any more questions, we can open it up to the crowd. So Rose, did you have another question, or Toni, you want to say something else before I open it up?
I do. I have a couple other things to say. The demise of Hotwire was somewhat wrapped up in what Carol just explained, but we had been off to the side and not dependent on ads from publishing companies or musicians or whatever. So we were able to go on. What happened was, culturally, everything became too big to stay an independent publication. The age range had gotten too big. It was already everybody from 20-year-olds to Ronnie Gilbert at that point. And all of the different cultural genres were demanding to be included: theater, writing, music. There were so many festivals, and we couldn't, unless we could actually afford to pay somebody to be their full-time job, we simply couldn't cover anymore the range of what was happening. And that was the good news and the bad news. And Lynn and Susan, who are our volunteer coordinator and office manager, both moved to Seattle, and we lasted a year after they left. The women who came to replace them, who were younger, were not competent, and one of them was just a grifter. You'll like this one, Carol. At the very end, she just didn't collect any money from any of our bookstore accounts. So, the deficit at that point was catastrophic. And I fired her. She was the only person, by the way, who ever got money from Hotwire. We paid her a stipend. Unbelievable. So, it came to pass, and the era of women's music went on to about 2000, I would say. And then just a sea change in the culture. National Women's Music Festival this year is the 50th. If you can get there by hook or by crook, this is what I see as basically our big final victory lap for our generation. I'm coordinating the music industry reunion. So anybody who was a producer, distributor, publisher, the behind the scenes worker, the techies, the radio shows are still going on, Rets. right? The ones, but we're going to have one last industry reunion. And it's just going to be great. And another thing that I do for National specifically every year, it's a bittersweet honor. I do the In Memoriam slideshow. And, more and more, it's our friends. It's, I've spent my entire adult life since I was 24 years old immersed in women's music and culture. This is what I've done almost every waking moment that I wasn't at a paid job. Every weekend, everything. So who are my friends? Well, they're these people. So the In Memoriam slideshow is getting more and more painful for me every year, but it is an honor. We see each other off, and what a wonderful lesbian honor guard we each have when it's our turn to step off. So for everything each of us has done who's in this Zoom today, yay, we did well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There are
Thank you,
questions in
Toni.
the chat.
Yes, I'm aware. Thank you, Toni and Carol. We will now open it up for discussion. However, let me first discuss how we're going to do that. We would appreciate it very much if you could raise your electronic hand. So there's a little somewhere in your toolbar, there's something that says raise hand. If you could do that, that helps me to kind of keep track of who the next person was that is up. And Laura, I see you here and I will watch for your hand should it raise up. The other thing to remind everybody of is that there are some people who are very dependent on reading the closed captionings and or reading lips. So we would ask that you please speak clearly and just offer a little pause before we move on to the next thing so that we're letting people catch up and also not talking over each other. There are some questions in the chat, and I will turn it over to Janet to ask those. But I know that there was one that I put in there for Carol, which is if you could talk also about the strategy of the Feminist Bookstore catalog that you did that we collectively did, a bunch of us did during the sort of the last years of FBN.
Okay. It's the last 5 years of FBN. We published a color catalog. I'll maybe go get some copies of it when I'm not talking. And the idea was well, we'll start at the back first. It had a list of all the feminist bookstores in the US and Canada with their address, their phone number, and then we took ads and, in that lesbian feminist political way. It was we opened it up to the mainstream publishers and invited them to advertise. We invited the feminist publishers to advertise, to take out a book. But of course, part of our advertising program was that I learned that you have to charge a bunch of money so the ad agencies can make money in producing your ad. If it's too small, they lose money. And of course, they don't want to lose money, so they don't want to deal with you. So we inflated that, and suddenly that gave us advertising. But we also created this alternative structure. Here's our regular advertising catalog, prices. And then there was this little insert, movement press rates. So the movement press rates were a straight 50% off the cost of the ad. And then you could get a contract. So if you did 2 ads in a year, you get 10% off of that. And if you did 3, you get 15% off of your 50%, which is to say, we brought the prices right down. Now, the catalog we printed, I'm not going to remember how many copies, 100,000 copies, and distributed them to full color, shiny paper, fancy, fancy catalogs, and we distributed them to all the women's bookstores in the US. And of course, we did a special edition for the Canadians with Canadian prices because, we were like that. But, we're feminist bookstores. We cannot take a random selection of books and say that represents who we are. So I always had to go through and, surprise, mainstream presses were not doing a lot of books by women of color. They were not doing a lot of political books. And so we'd get kind of the first draft of what was in it. And then we'd look for, that old trick. It's not just who's in the room, it's who isn't in the room. So we would say who isn't there. And then we'd look at the books that had been published or were coming out that would fill those needs. And we'd start offering deals to the feminist presses. Okay, you already get 60% off, but we'll cut that in half if you'll do this book. And so that would be passed too, and some would be willing to do that. And some would want to be behind that book in that way. And then in the end, what the holes were, we just filled in, we'll add two novels by Latino women for free because we had to be representative. We had to include all of our community. We didn't want any woman looking at that catalog and not seeing something for herself in it. So that was this huge project, which drove more than one of my staff people crazy, coordinating it all. But it gave the feminist bookstores something really gorgeous to be handing out free over the counter to, I always said, take some to the laundromats. There's women in the laundromats who need to know about feminist bookstores. Take them to events, to coffee shops, to wherever women gathered. So that gave the bookstores a really powerful promotion piece. And the women who read it loved it. I mean, I kept the FBN phone number for 10 years after it closed. And every year I would get 5 or 6 calls from someone who had her catalog and wanted to know where she could order this particular book from 10 or 12 years ago. And the thing is, the women who were, getting the catalog. Oh, one other thing we did was we bought the Ms. Magazine mailing list and the Sojourner mailing list, and we mailed them out to all those people. Is that the customers were so proud. They loved having something that was shiny and pretty, that reflected back what they did. But they were proud of this list in the back. I never knew there were 100 feminist bookstores. I never knew there was a women's bookstore in Alabama. I'm going to tell my sister. I never knew. Or they'd say, oh, well, we're going to go driving and we can stop in this one and this one and this one and this one. So it was a really powerful, exciting thing. We kind of stole the model from the independent booksellers associations. And what they did was they supported staff with a similar catalog. What we did was we paid to get it out to Ms. Magazine. But we didn't lose a lot of money on it either. So there.
Hey, thanks. So Janet, I'm going to ask you to take the spotlights off, please, so that everybody can see each other. And I think the other thing we can do, I see a lot of hands up. So I think what we can do is go back and forth. So please keep your questions or your comments brief, because it looks like we have a lot of people who are really interested in participating. So please keep your questions brief. And so we'll start with Batya, and then I'll have Janet do something from the chat, and then we'll go back to Mary, see if there's something else in the chat. So we'll just alternate it that way so that we can try to get most things in. So Batya, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, the year I founded FemSpec, a student came in with that list of 100 bookstores, and we wrote to all of them. And I said the same thing, 100 bookstores. And then I went to Crazy Ladies because it was in that list. But what I wanted to do is thank both of you for all the work that you've done, and it certainly influenced my life. And I wanted to ask Carol, how do you get the mainstream publishers to buy ads? And what you mentioned, an ad agency, what is that?
Publishers subcontract the making of ads and placing them and all the details of that. They have ad agencies that do all that work for them. How we got mainstream publishers to advertise. There were several important parts. One was that we did tear sheets. Every issue, every book that we reviewed or announced, we tore out and we mailed to that publisher with a letter saying, we just reviewed this book. We announced this book of yours, and here's our ad rate card. And, you send, so at least 6 times a year, a lot of publishers were getting our tear sheets. So they all knew we existed. And then another great strategy was we went to the American Booksellers Association convention every year. We took out a booth, went around and talked to people. But boy, once we started doing these pretty catalogs, all of the feminist booksellers who were there would go around, and as they were shopping and ordering books for their stores, they would say, oh, that would be a great title. You should put that in the Feminist Bookstore catalog. Here, I just happen to have one, and here's all the ordering information. So we had, there would always be 20, 25 feminist booksellers stalking the floor, looking for the books they wanted to see in the catalog. And they were the best possible salespeople because they knew what they could sell. They knew what would work. They knew what they wanted in their stores. So that was kind of how it worked.
Thank you.
Okay. Janet, was there a question in the chat you wanted to bring up?
Well, actually, I'm thinking that most of the people who put questions in chat have their hands up. So let's wait and see what happens if there's anything at the end.
All right, that sounds good. So go ahead, Mary.
Yep, I was one of the ones who had something in the chat. I just want to say a huge, 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 huge thank you to both of you. And the huge, both for what you did then and what you're doing now to preserve it. That is just massive and huge, because I am very fortunate to know a lot of young lesbian feminists who are eager and hungry to learn about all this and to read all this. And I'm hoping this is being recorded. Is this something that is this something that I'll be able to share with those young women, that they could watch this? I hope so, because, and I'll definitely share the websites, but I'm hoping that this will be available. And there are a whole bunch of young women who we would think perhaps as lesbians who wouldn't call themselves lesbians, who don't want to have anything to do with us older lesbians. But I am in touch with and aware of a whole lot of young lesbian feminists who are very, very interested, and am one of many women trying to get them to festivals like Rise that Toni mentioned, and other festivals on the land in Michigan, and other festivals. There is this thing called Amazon Trail that's a Discord server that was started by a 25-year-old, she's now 25, went to her first women's festival in 2022. And she, at that point, was 21, had never met another lesbian in person. Went to a festival on the land in 2022, got so completely turned on, she started recruiting all her friends. Now she runs this Amazon Trail Discord server that has 350 women on it, and it's promoting a whole long list of women's festivals. And there are young women there finding all of this. So there are women coming along that we're passing the baton to. But so grateful that that you did all you did then, and that now we have this that we can help hand on to the next generation. Thank you.
In response to your question about the recording, it is being recorded. It will eventually, when I get around to it, get it up on the OLOC website under the affiliates page. It will be on YouTube, so just copy and paste the YouTube link to send to your folks. Okay, go ahead, Laurie.
Okay, I have 3 comments. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but remember there's a line, so kind of keep them short if you could, please.
I'll try to do that. People have been talking about indexing and archives, and I just wanted to mention that when we went, Lady Slipper went to Duke for archiving. We haven't done it all, but a stipulation of signing the contract was that they had to scan all of our catalogs. And finally, it took them about 10 years to get there, but they did that, and they made a keyword search on it for the entire thing. So we didn't, we don't have the formal index, but I end up using that keyword search myself at least once a week. I have directed artists who call and customers who call. It's very useful. And maybe other, maybe all PDFs even have that now. I'm not sure. Okay, my second comment is just this. People were talking about, why things were winding down, ending, the difficulties. And I just want to mention when the feminist bookstores started having bankruptcies because of the, unfair competition and all that, the domino effect that happened. Our culture was so interconnected. We were like this huge organism, and piece by piece, as each little component fell, the ramifications down the line, it just, those kinds of things really, really grew. I just want us to understand how much we relied on everybody who was involved in this in our heyday. The third thing was Carol mentioned statistics, and I think that's really fascinating to think about. And just a couple I'll mention for Lady Slipper, I calculated if each catalog had been like a typed out on double-spaced page, each catalog would have been about 1,000 pages. And so thinking about the thousands and thousands of pages of information our culture generated of information between publishing and music and literature, it's just unbelievable. And that in our highest year, I figured out that we shipped out about 1,000 recordings every business day at our peak. What our culture has done in our decades is just amazing. And thank you so much to Carol and Toni and everybody who's been involved. It's just, I think we've been amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie.
Laurie, can you
Rex, go ahead.
Laurie, can you put the archive address into the chat?
I just did, I think.
Oh, thank you.
Ladyslipper.org. It will take you there. Is that correct, Laurie?
It will. There's a way to connect. There's 2 archives there, one for the online archive, but also the print catalog archive. I'll go get the print catalog archive and put it in the chat. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Rex, go ahead.
Okay. I just want to ask Carol Seajay a question. Do you remember Pat Cohen and the JMP distributors?
Sure.
They had a catalog in the 80s. I'm just wondering if you remember them, if you remember
Of
that.
course. Of
Yeah,
course.
I was a sales dyke in those days, and I traveled to San Francisco with her catalog, and I met you at Old Wives' Tales, and I was so impressed with your store and you, and I was just really in awe, and you bought a bunch of stuff too. But so I just wanted, Pat's in Florida now, and she's just a great friend of mine, and I just wanted to. I just remember those days, and I wanted to see if you remembered it. And also, I just want to say to Toni and Carol and Lori and Margie and everyone else, we owe them such a debt of gratitude that I'm getting for all their work that they've done creating lesbian music and culture. And I wouldn't be able, I was part of it, but I just learned so much from all of them. And then Kathy Munzer and the Chicago girls. I mean, they were great, and Georgette. So I just wanted to throw all that out there, and I'll see you at the 50th. Right? Okay.
Thanks, Rets. Kathy, go ahead.
Very nice, Rets.
Well, I'm just remembering how inspired and magical our network was. So I just want to say that, inspiring and magical. And yeah, thank you so much to everybody that's on here that, we all remember that. And I am also looking forward to the 50th. But Toni, how did you do everything? Because Toni produced at Mount Moving with me. She also did Hotwire. And then I found We Shall Go Forth, a 1982 directory of resources where you could find out who was producing, bookstores, record labels, festivals, everything. So that was that. And then in 1983 also. And it was Women's Music Plus. You did that too, Toni. So anyway, thank you. But I just want to say also, we're still thriving in Chicago. This last weekend, the LGBTQ Center had a Women's History Month luncheon free. Saturday night, I went to an event which some women from Lansing came, May being one of them, Margie, and sold Rise t-shirts. So that was good. Anyway, and then Sunday, Affinity, a mostly Black lesbian organization, still going strong, 30 years plus, also had a free luncheon on Sunday. So I've always felt lucky to be in Chicago because, like Toni said, we've had problems and issues, and we still do. But somehow we have this connection where we're just gonna do it. We're gonna work our way through it. And I just felt honored to be a producer for so long at Mountain Moving. It was the time of my life. So thanks, everybody.
I just want to jump in, Kathy. I published that directory from 1977 until 1995, about every 2 years. And I had to stop in 95 because there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of listings, and it just had gotten too big. It was a listing of producers, distributors, radio shows, bookstores, agents and managers, whatever the categories might have been in there. Any musician could take this directory and book an entire tour. And in fact, one time, one of the years, Kay Gardner's manager just fell through. She just used it and booked the entire tour herself. This was one of the things that I think was the most shocking in a good way, is how non-competitive lesbian feminists were in an extremely competitive industry. If I give you my contact at that bar, which is the only bar within 500 miles that'll hire us, you're going to get the gig, not me. But here's the address. Good luck to us all. So.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and say the same thing. Everybody went out of their way to be kind and helpful. And I never, as a producer, no really big issues. And, we had every Saturday night except August when we all went to Michigan. So, yeah, anyway, thanks.
I'm sorry, I got distracted by what was going on with the directories there. If you, I put the Wanderground collections article, a good website in the chat. And if you go into collections and look under directory, I think some of those directories are there in the Wanderground archive. Sorry, not digitized, but at least it's listed there. So you can look at them. And Jamie Anderson also did a directory for a while of musicians and places where folks could perform and who to contact for media and so on and so forth. So that's also in there. Okay, Christine, go ahead.
Okay, there we are. Thank you for the memories. I was peripherally involved with both the books and the music. Way back around 1972, I put a little ad in Ms. Magazine for independent woman books, old, rare, and out of print lesbian literature. And for several years there, I bought and sold lesbian literature. Now all 87 boxes of that lesbian literature is now archived at the Central Connecticut State University Archives. And then in 1981, I produced both Women's Music for Everyone concerts in Hartford and the Newmer Festival out in Cornwall, Connecticut. And so I want to pick up on Toni's comment about the upcoming National Women's Music Festival, because I still have 300, nearly 300 contact addresses from lesbians that I've been collecting over the decades, and basically volunteers. I tried to write them about it, didn't get any response. So Toni, I definitely want to talk more with you, and I want everybody else on screen to be aware that I've got a list of regional workers, and if they knew that the National Women's Music Festival was having a special workshop time for them, which it sounds like Toni is organizing, I would invite them. So that's one thing. And then just before I ask a question, victim of our own
could you just be mindful of our time, Christine? We're really running out of time. So go to your question, please.
I will speak quickly.
Oh, go to your question, please.
Okay. My question was, I know AI is problematic, but it can be helpful. Is there any effort in the Old Lesbian Oral History Project? We've got 900 interviews, and the thematic questions are critically important. Has anybody started a AI project that could be used in a positive way while you're waiting? The reason, once Melissa Etheridge hit mainstream concert halls, girls with guitar concerts couldn't sell. But anyway, if there's no answer to the AI, we'll just go on.
All right, thank you. Jean?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I was taken away from my computer, and I don't have the rich experiences that you've related to all of you, remembering them. However, Barbara Lindquist and I started a bookstore in Racine, Wisconsin, not the hotbed of feminism, I'll tell you, but without all of your resources coming into our little bookstore, not only were we able to teach people, we learned so much. And we got all this information coming in, and nobody seemed to charge us for it. That might be part of the survival project. But we would go to all the ABAs, and Carol Seajay would meet us at the train station or the airport or whatever. And it was a two-person job And then the bookstore didn't do well because um, uh, there was too much competition. Anyway, we started Mother Courage Press, published 15 books, and we did it on the two of us and computers. And Barbara spoke on using computers to improve our publishing of our books. She spoke in Spain and in Montreal. Okay. We retired in the year 2000, and we had to get rid of our books. Well, I am now reviving Mother Courage Press all by myself. And I don't know how far it's going to go, but I have written memories of all of our lesbian events in 8 books. I published 4 of them in 2024 and 4 of them in 2025. And now I'm going around and talking to people, and I'll be I'll be the oldest lesbian at 94 at the music festival, and I'm just living on love. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Jean. Carol, go ahead.
Yeah, someone asked about papers. So when I closed down Feminist Bookstore News, I had been to many of Joan's workshops on that you have to save everything and archive everything. So I dutifully did that, and I donated 74 bankers' boxes of papers that are now at the San Francisco Public Library. And I chose the San Francisco one is because it's close to me, and even though I don't fly anymore, I can still get to those archives. And the other is that Barbara Greer's papers were there. And as has happened, many people have come to look at Barbara's papers and then the nice librarians say, oh, and you might also be interested in Feminist Bookstore News. So that's been a good strategy. So I would put that in the chat, but I haven't figured out how to do that. I'm too busy just watching the type. So.
Thanks, Carol. So there was another comment in the chat from Tree Child. Apparently Blanche Jackson is somewhere and can hear us. And the question is, do you have a question, Blanche, or should we move on?
You can move on.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad you're here. It's been a long time since we've seen you. All right.
No, I wish
I'm sorry, what was the last thing you said?
I said I wish my computer was alive.
Yes, okay. All right. So I think I don't see any more hands, and I want to thank you all very much for your participation in today's event. Toni or Carol, if you have any last comments, or if Meryl or Rose wants to wrap up in any way, we can do that. But I think all of us want to give you a big wave and a hi and a hug and large amount of appreciation for all that you have done. And also a shout out to the many volunteers who really helped both of you, either writing columns or taking pictures or sending tidbits of whatever, or passing around the publications and everything like that. So all of us need a big pat on the back, because I think many of us were involved in that in some way or another. So thank you all for being here this afternoon, and we'll see you at our next event, which I think is soon. I don't know when. It's in April. It's the end of April. We got 2 events coming up the end of April. Toni, did you want to say one more thing?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone here for making my dreams come true.
And thanks to
All
Mev
right.
and the OLAC and the Zoom crew. Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Thank
And
you,
I-
everyone. Have a good
Yeah.
evening. We'll see you later.
Bev, I just want to make a quick comment. Don't forget, if you want the information in the chat, you can save it. If you click on the chat, there's also to the right of the lesbian periodical, there's those famous three little dots. And if you click on that, the very top thing is save the chat, and it'll come to your computer.
It doesn't say save.
And stay in touch because there's going to be more of these.
That's right. This is the first in what we outlined as four different topics, four different conversations about lesbian periodicals. I don't remember who's up next, but we'll make sure y'all know about it when it's time.
A mystery.
And know that Lesbian Connection is still alive and going.
Yes.
Yes, it is. As is Sinister Wisdom.
Save the chat, babe.
No, either.
Okay, everyone, thank you very much. I'm going to wait a couple minutes because I know a couple of you are trying to save the chat, so I'll just hang out here because as soon as I shut down, everybody's going to go away.
Thanks, Mev.
Thank you all.
Hey, Georgette,
Didn't do it.
fun,
Didn't say anything.
fun to share this one with you. Georgette, it was fun to share this one with you.
Yeah. Hey, Janet, I was hitting the three dots next to and nothing. It didn't come up.
On the chat, not on the chat.
On the chat.
Yeah, on the chat.
Okay, click. Do you have it open?
Yeah.
Okay, so when it's open, where you see the title Lesbian Public Periodicals,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
over to the right, you should have three dots.
We do. I do.
Click on that.
And it says show chat previews.
Oh, really? That's weird because mine says
That's
save
weird.
chat.
Yeah, mine says save
It's,
chat too.
it's an iPad. You think that's the reason?
That could be it.
Who
I don't
knows
know
what
On
those
anything
my
are?
about
iPad,
this.
I'm getting the same thing, Rets. I don't have the ability to save it.
And I guess we don't have the ability to save it, but maybe we can get a copy somehow, Toni.
Well, you know what?
Oh, it's
Maybe if
okay.
you speak to me nicely, I'll send it to you.
See that?
Yeah,
Toni,
All
you
right.
I
were
was going to
great.
say I could too.
You and CJ.
So I'm sending the chat to
Brendan, it's
Rets
good to-
and to Toni.
No, I don't
Anybody
need
else?
I got what I need from it.
Oh,
Okay.
all right. So just send it to me.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thank
Kate.
you.
Thank you,
Good to
Toni.
see you. Good to see you, Carol. See you again in 30 years.
And thank you to everyone who made this happen.
Yeah. It was
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
Zoom crew.
And hi, Margie.
Zoom
Hi,
crew.
Carol.
Bye.